All right, today on our OBS project, we're going to talk about shocks and shock mounts and how we're going to set this up. And we got a good plan going. And before we get to working on building some parts, I want to give you guys a thought about some suspension concept. You know, in the 90s, Pontiac had a deal. They kept saying, you know, wider is better for the wide track Grand Am car that they were doing to make the suspension wider and more stable. And Ford in the 2000s, you know, they moved the shocks outboard on their pickup, which was a, you know, big monumental move for them to make the suspension stance wider. And there is a good thought to keep about that, you know, because I'm giving you an easy way to think about it. If you were sitting on a bar stool, cracking a few cold ones open with your buddies, you know, bar stools, even this bar stool, which is a cheapy one, you can look at it, the legs get wider as they go to the ground. See, it's a wider platform, it's more stable. Now, if you had a bar stool where all the legs went inboard, you know, you crack too many beers open, dude, you're heading to the ground, you're gonna fall. It's not gonna be stable. So that's an easy way to understand the concept, that you get your suspension components out wide and it makes a more stable platform to have a good time on. So let's go back and check out our project and we'll take a look. Let's take a look at the factory shock. Now, this has been flipped so it's lower, but you see these are inside the frame. So, you know, this is the span from one side to the other is as wide as it's going to get. Also, this shock now lays down at a huge angle. Now, you guys are all smart. You can use the internet and you could Google like shock angle ratio or shock angle percentage, and it'd come with a chart that shows you, based on how many degrees you lean the shock over, how much effectiveness of the shock that you lose. And this shock is probably only worth about 30% of its shock value at this angle. And of course, historically on OBSs, you get the flip kit and, you know, from the big manufacturers, and it comes with a shock extension that bolted on here and hung down, and they all broke off. You know, and still the shock was relatively short and the shocks bottomed out, and it was still laying over about 45 degrees, so it didn't work very good. So we're not going to use this or this bracket or any of this stuff because it's not what we're trying to do. So now we're going to go show you how we make some parts and what we're going to do to this thing. All right, so you saw the plasma cutter cutting away, and you saw something that was actual reality is we got to the point where the tip was a little bit burned and it didn't want to cut, so we had to go back and refinish one of the parts. Anyway, when I do a lot of prototyping, when I'm going to make a part, these slices here, these allow me to bend it. I can actually just put this in the vise and bend it by hand to the angle I want and then weld it up. And you know, I could go program my press brake and bend them, but it's honestly easier and faster to do this, and I'm not sure, you know, in prototyping that this is exactly where I want to be, so I don't really want to take the time to program my press brake. So I just plan to put a cut in where I'm going to bend it, and then I bend it to how I want, and then I weld it back up. So this part here, once it's welded, becomes this part. And we just weld up the cuts and whatnot. So we showed you last time that we made some U-bolt plates for the bottom of the axle to hold it on, and they work, but they didn't give us a shock mount, and that's really what we decided we wanted to do. So we're going to replace the U-bolt plates that we made. There's another throwaway item, that's how you learn in prototyping, with a pair of these. And this is going to hold a shock stud, and that's going to give us our shock mount. And these brackets here are going to work in with our upper mount to be the upper shock mount with a cross member we're going to add into the frame. So we're going to go to work on the cross member, and we'll show you all the pieces. Got to the point.
Give it back to you. I didn't need to take up all your sweet time. Give it back to you. Each and every day. If I don't see him in this world, say the next one. Don't be late, don't be late, 'cause I'm a voodoo child. God knows I'm a voodoo child.
so this is a welded up shock bracket, and this is going to be the U-bolt receiver and our centering pin, and we're going to use a factory style shock stud that's going to fit through here and give us a shock mount. And I try to use as much OE style hardware as I can because it just makes it easier down the road when you have to maintenance something. So this is going to fit right underneath like so. Now it is low down here, but we did calculate the scrub line of the wheel, so if we have a flat, this still won't hit the ground. So we should be okay. So we're just going to stop, you know, bolts in, get it bolted together. Seen the lower shock mount, which is part of the U-bolt plate, which is common on a lot of cars, whatnot. So that's a pretty normal looking item. And then you saw the building of this cross member here. Now we're using the RideTech C-notch, so we want to, you know, we're going to try to incorporate that. I know a lot of guys are not going to have the RideTech C-notch; they're going to have something else. So we also want to make it be able to bolt in just to the top of the frame. And that means we can't go over the top. We got to go underneath because we don't know how thick the other C-notches are going to be. So depending on any company that you use for your C-notch or whatever has been done to your truck at this point, we don't want to have you undo that to redo. So you can use this cross member for an upper shock mount without having to redo anything that's already been done to your truck. And this is simply just going to fit in like in between the two and span the gap, and we made it so that you can bolt it in either from the side like we're going to do here and down, or just down through the top through the bolts here. We'll be fine. It'll hold it plenty strong enough.
God knows I'm a voodoo child, voodoo child.
So you can see the shock cross member installed, and there's a look at the hardware going through. So this can be bolted in to the RideTech C-notch plate or just underneath to the stock frame. See, and this gives us an upper mount here on each side, which is the welded through tube. And now you have a look down. You can see our lower shock mount down there lining up nice, and we have a lot of length for a shock. We got a great angle, and our shock base is wider, being out under the leaf spring instead of way inboard. You know, we're 5-6 inches wider per side. You know, in percentages from the center out, that's a huge change in the shock stance. It's going to make it a lot more stable, and should have a great ride quality. So next we're going to worry about shock length. Okay, so when we come back next time, we're going to just burn out the factory rivets holding the shock mounts on, and we're going to cut the mounts off the axle housing and get them out of the way. And we're going to get some shocks on it, and then we're going to start working on our torque arm, and that's going to be the finish up of the rear of this thing. Except that we're really thinking about doing a replacement of this cross member so we can put a fuel tank or a cell back here, move some more weight back. So that's a decision we're making as we go. And anyway, remember, if you're enjoying this, give comments. If there's something you want to see, drop us a note in the comments box. Remember to subscribe and like us and share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.